I saw him through the rain-streaked glass of an old passenger car. A small, soaked German Shepherd puppy, no older than 6 months, sitting in the front row beside the window like he'd bought a ticket. His ears were half flopped, his fur matted with drizzle and rust, and around his neck was a faded children's scarf, tied gently in a crooked bow. That's what stopped me in my tracks. Not the setting, not the dog, that scarf. My name's Frank. I'm 61. I used to work this line, Amtrak Erie Depot, back when these tracks still mattered. Now, I manage the shipping warehouse across the street, but I take my lunch in silence here. No one bothers you in a dead station. It's just you, the wind, and the echoes of arrivals that never happened. The first time I saw him, I thought he was lost. The second time, I thought he was waiting. By the third, I knew he belonged to this place. Every day for a week, rain or cold, he came back. Always to the same seat. Always by the window. He'd climb into the old train car through a gap in the rusted side door, hop onto that torn vinyl seat like a commuter on schedule, and just sit there, sometimes for hours. Looking out, I tried to approach him once, brought leftover chicken in a napkin. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, he just looked at me with those huge brown eyes that seemed too old for a puppy. He didn't come closer, but he didn't run either. He just watched, like he was waiting to see if I belonged too. There was no collar, no tag, just that scarf, soft, fraying at the edges, with little loops like a child had tied it in a rush. It was soaked through, clinging to his neck, but he never tried to shake it off. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the local shelter, asked if anyone had reported a missing German Shepherd puppy. Nothing. I posted a photo in a community group. No one recognized him. No one came. That night, I sat outside the station in my truck long after closing. I kept the lights off. I watched him sneak into the train car again, like clockwork. He curled up on the seat, head pressed against the window. It was the kind of stillness that didn't come from rest. It came from grief. Something had happened in that train car. Something that made him believe that if he sat there long enough, someone might return. And I wasn't sure if my heart could take watching him do it again tomorrow. I came back the next morning with a thermos of coffee and a bag of warm scrambled eggs. It was still dark. The sky over Erie was the color of lead, low and heavy with more rain. I parked in the same spot across from the station and waited. And at exactly 7:12 a.m., he came trotting down the broken path between the tracks, paws splashing in shallow puddles, tail low but not tucked. Like he was late for a train that hadn't come in years. He leapt into the old passenger car through the usual side gap like it was his second home and settled in the same seat. His movements were ritualistic. He faced forward, pressed his body against the window, and just sat, as if that exact spot held the scent of someone he refused to forget, as if leaving it meant giving up. I opened my truck door slowly, no sudden moves. I crossed the lot, climbed the crumbling steps to the car, and leaned in. "Morning, buddy," I said quietly. He turned to look at me, ears flicking forward, but made no sound. His eyes were calm, but there was something hollow behind them. Not fear, not aggression, just silence. I crouched and held out the eggs. "You hungry?" He didn't move. I set the food on the step and backed away, sat down on an overturned bucket a few feet away. I sipped my coffee. The wind whistled through the broken windows. A train horn sounded in the distance. Just a freighter, but I saw his ears twitch. His eyes didn't move, but he'd heard it. He was listening for something. Maybe a memory. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, he stood, walked to the step, and sniffed the food. He didn't wolf it down. He took a bite, chewed slowly, then licked the rest clean. That was the first day he let me stay near him. The scarf around his neck had dried a little overnight, but now it was heavy again with the mist. I noticed the edges were fraying worse than before. The knot was loose, like a child had tied it, or maybe a child had been wearing it and gave it to him before vanishing. I tried to imagine the scenario. A family riding this train, maybe hiding out here last winter, a kid and their dog, wrapped in blankets, a scarf offered like a promise, "Stay here, I'll be back." And he believed it. Dogs always do. I stayed with him until noon that day, just sitting, no leash, no words. Just two old souls waiting for things that might never return. Before I left, I looked at him and said, "I'll be back tomorrow, okay?" He didn't move. But as I turned away, I heard it, a faint shuffle behind me. When I looked back, he was standing in the doorway of the train car watching me go. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about that scarf, the way it clung to his neck like it meant something sacred. Not just a scrap of cloth, it was a symbol, a memory wrapped in wool. Maybe it held a scent. Maybe it was all he had left of someone he loved. The next morning, I brought a folding chair, an old army blanket, and 2 turkey sandwiches. I set up right beside the train car like it was my job now. I had nowhere else to be that weekend, and truth be told, I didn't want to be anywhere else. The world felt too loud, too complicated. But here with him, it all slowed down, became honest. Raw. He showed up just after 8, slower than usual. His paws dragged more in the gravel, maybe tired, maybe hungry, maybe losing hope. But he still came. This time when he climbed inside the car, he didn't go straight to the seat. He looked at me first. Not long, just a few seconds, but enough to feel like trust wasn't 1,000 miles away. He circled once, twice, then laid down across the seat, chin on his paws, eyes still facing forward, still waiting. I sat beside the doorway, unwrapped a sandwich, and ate half. Then I gently tore the rest into small pieces and set them on a paper napkin inside the car. He didn't hesitate this time. He stood, patted over, and ate every bite. No rush, no fear. But when he finished, he didn't back away. He sat right there, inches from me. That's when I noticed something new. His front left paw had a scar, thin, white, and healed but visible. And under his fur, just behind his shoulder, there was a patch where the hair hadn't grown back right. Like maybe he'd gotten caught on something, fought something, survived something. I reached out, slow and steady, hand open. He flinched but didn't move away. My fingers brushed the scarf, damp again from the morning fog. The knot was tighter today, maybe from the rain, maybe from him shifting in his sleep. I didn't untie it, didn't dare. It wasn't mine to touch, not yet. Then I whispered, "Who tied this on you, boy? Huh? Who are you waiting for?" His ears perked, he looked me dead in the eyes, and for a heartbeat, I swear, just for a second, I saw it. Pain, not fear, not confusion, but real, crushing pain, the kind that sticks. I stayed until sunset. He didn't leave the car, didn't even nap, just sat there like he was on duty, watching the horizon through shattered glass, like something was going to appear at any moment. Someone. That night, I locked up the warehouse early, couldn't stop thinking about him, about what he was holding on to. And the worst part, I was starting to believe whoever he was waiting for wasn't coming back. Sunday morning hit hard. The wind had shifted overnight, and the cold that blew through Erie felt sharper, like it had teeth. I bundled up in layers, grabbed an extra blanket, and drove straight to the station without even making coffee. I didn't want to miss him. He was already there. Curled in his seat, head tucked into his chest, the scarf damp with frost. His breath came in slow, steady clouds like he was trying to disappear into the glass. And for the first time since I found him, he looked smaller, like he was giving up. I climbed into the train car, laid the blanket across the torn seat next to him, and sat down. I didn't say anything, didn't want to break the quiet. I just sat there, knees aching from the cold, heart heavy. After a while, he lifted his head. His eyes met mine. I reached into my coat and pulled out a photo. It was worn and creased, a snapshot from an old paper notice that had been taped to the window of the grocery store months ago. I'd kept it in my glove box for no reason I could ever explain. It was a little girl, maybe 10. Freckles, big smile, and next to her, a puppy, a German shepherd, smaller than the one in the car, but with the same ears, same eyes, same crooked little grin. I showed him the photo. "Is this you, boy?" His eyes didn't move, but his nose twitched, twice, then again. I placed the picture on the seat beside him and leaned back, watching. He leaned forward, sniffed it gently, and then laid his head down beside it. Not on my lap, not on the blanket, on the photo. I felt something twist in my gut. I had to know. I got up and walked to the police substation a few blocks over. Brought the photo, described the dog, asked if anyone had ever filed a missing child report in that area. The officer was kind, but shook his head. We get a lot of people passing through, especially during the colder months. Families who stay off the radar. Sometimes in the old rail cars, sometimes abandoned buildings, they leave as quickly as they come. I asked if he could check archived records anyway. He nodded, promised to try. Back at the train car, the puppy hadn't moved. The photo was still under his head, his eyes half closed, body still as stone. I sat beside him again, whispered, She didn't forget you. She couldn't. And even though he didn't understand my words, he sighed. A long, low breath, the kind you let out when your heart's been waiting too long. And I knew I had to do more than just sit with him. I had to bring him home, but not as a rescue, as family. I waited until Tuesday to make my move. I didn't want to rush him. This wasn't about tossing a leash over his neck and calling it a day. He wasn't a stray in the usual sense. He belonged somewhere, even if that place didn't exist anymore. I needed him to know that if he came with me, it wouldn't be a replacement. It would be something new. That morning, I brought a soft harness I'd picked up from the local feed store. It took me 20 minutes just to choose the right size. I knew it had to be snug but not tight, light but secure. The kind of thing a pup could wear without feeling trapped. The kind that said, "You're safe now," without speaking a word. I also brought sausage links. When I reached the train car, he was already there, sitting with that same quiet stillness that broke me every time. The scarf was crusted with frost, and he looked thinner than he had just 2 days ago. I set the food on the floor, a little closer this time. He sniffed it, looked at me, then crept forward and ate straight from my palm. That's when I pulled the harness into view. No sudden movements. I let him see it, let him sniff it. He didn't flinch. I took it as a sign. "You want to go for a ride, buddy?" I said gently. He tilted his head. Not much, just enough to acknowledge the sound of my voice. I reached out, slowly looped the harness around his front, clipped it gently behind his shoulders. He didn't resist. Not once. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for him to pull back or panic. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching me, trusting me. That's when I saw it up close for the first time, the tag sewn into the scarf, almost hidden in the threading. It was worn, faded, but I could still make out the letters. To my best friend, M. No number, no last name, just an initial, and that single line that hit harder than anything else ever could. I lifted him into my truck, placed a towel down on the seat, and sat there for a second before turning the key. He didn't bark, didn't fidget, just curled up beside me, rested his head on the seatbelt buckle, and closed his eyes, like he'd been carrying the weight of someone else's goodbye for too long. When we got home, I didn't force him inside. I opened the door, stepped out, and waited. He hopped down after a few seconds, sniffed the porch, then followed me in. He didn't explore. He didn't race around like puppies usually do. He just found a quiet corner in the living room, curled up beside the couch, and watched me as I took off my coat. "I guess this is our stop now," I said softly, and that's how it started. No name yet, no promises, just two souls quietly healing under the same roof. The first night he didn't sleep much. I could hear his breathing shift every time the floor creaked or a branch tapped against the window. He stayed curled beside the couch, eyes half open, ears twitching at every sound like a soldier who'd forgotten the war was over. I didn't try to move him. I just sat nearby in my recliner, blanket across my lap, reading a book I never turned past page 12. At some point around 2 a.m., I dozed off. When I woke up, I felt a weight against my boots. He was lying across my feet. Still not asleep, but not trembling anymore either. Progress. The next few days were slow, gentle. I gave him space, but also routine. I left the back door open during the day so he could come and go. I laid out a bed by the fireplace, put down bowls of water and food. Nothing fancy, just consistent. He never touched the dog bed. But the couch, eventually he climbed up, circled 3 times, and laid his head right where mine had been resting the day before. I started calling him Miles. It came to me on the 3rd morning. I was pouring coffee and then looked over as he sat by the front window watching the empty street. It reminded me of train tracks. Long, straight, quiet, and I thought, he's still traveling, in his own way. He didn't respond at first. But by day 5, when I said Miles, his ears perked. Day 6, he came when I said it softly. Day 7, he wagged his tail, just once, barely a twitch. But I saw it. That scarf stayed around his neck the entire time. I never touched it. It felt sacred, like some unspoken connection to wherever he came from. I figured when he was ready, he'd let it go, or maybe he never would. Either way, I respected it. It was the 8th morning when something strange happened. I was sipping my coffee on the porch, and Miles was lying in the sun by the steps. An old man came walking down the street, tall, thin, gray-bearded, holding a beat-up walking stick and wearing a wool coat 2 sizes too big. He paused when he saw us, tipped his head. Looked at Miles. That your boy? He asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I'd earned that title yet. He stared a little longer, then said, I saw him. Back by the rails. A few weeks ago. He was carrying something in his mouth. Soft. Looked like fabric. My heart skipped. A scarf? The man nodded. Might have been. But what struck me was where he went. He wasn't just wandering. He walked straight into that old car like he knew it by heart, sat by the window like he had an appointment. My throat tightened. The man tipped his stick at me. Dogs don't wait for nothing that didn't matter. Then he kept walking. That night, Miles slept through till morning. First time since he came home, and when I woke up, the scarf was lying on the floor, neatly folded. I stared at that scarf for a long time. It was early morning, the kind of stillness that only happens before the world fully wakes up. The fireplace crackled low, casting flickers of gold across the hardwood. And there it was, Miles's scarf, sitting in the exact center of the rug like it had been placed there on purpose. Folded, straight, reverent. Miles was across the room, stretched out on the couch, chin resting on his paw. He didn't look at me, but I swear he knew what he'd done. I walked over slowly, crouched down, and picked it up. The wool was worn soft from time, from weather, from touch. I turned it over in my hands, and that tiny stitch tag caught the light. To my best friend, M. I pressed my thumb over the letters. I thought about how small hands must have once tied this, how long he'd carried it like a lifeline. Something had changed. I didn't know what exactly, but I knew it was important. Later that day, I called Officer Daniels, the guy from the local precinct who promised to look into the photo I showed him. He said he hadn't forgotten. In fact, he dug up something unusual. Frank, he said, there was a welfare report filed last winter. Anonymous tip about a mother and child living out of the old rail yard. By the time responders arrived, they were gone. No names, no clear IDs. Just a note in the file that a puppy had been seen with them. He paused. You think this dog was theirs? I don't think, I said. I know. There was silence for a beat. I'll keep digging, he said. Maybe we can find something. After I hung up, I sat with Miles by the window. The wind outside had picked up. Leaves swirled like whispers against the porch. He laid his head on my lap. No tension in his shoulders, no watching the door, just rest. I hadn't realized until then how much I needed this too. To believe in something simple, something good. To care for someone without condition. A few days later, I brought Miles with me to the station one last time. I don't know why. Closure, maybe. Or maybe I needed to see if he'd still go back, but he didn't. He sniffed the edge of the platform, looked around, then turned and walked back toward me, tail swaying easy. No hesitation. I exhaled, long and slow. That night, I framed the scarf, hung it near the fireplace, right above where he liked to curl up, not as a goodbye, as a reminder. Of where he'd been, of what he'd carried, of the love that brought him here, even after the train stopped running. Miles didn't need the scarf anymore, because now he had a home. Fall turned colder fast. By November, snow had already dusted the rooftops of Erie, and the mornings came with a layer of frost on the truck windshield. I started leaving the heat on low through the night for Miles. Not that he needed it, he had taken full ownership of the couch, but I did it anyway. That was the thing about having him around. He made me want to do more than necessary. He had this quiet way of filling space. Not demanding it, just being in it. I started bringing him to work. The guys at the warehouse fell in love with him instantly. Big Hank from receiving tried to act like he didn't care, but I caught him sneaking beef jerky under the desk by day 2. Miles didn't bark, didn't beg, didn't cause a fuss. He just followed me from station to station, laid down when I stopped, stood when I moved, like he'd been doing this job for years. He's like a shadow, one of the drivers said, except better looking. I laughed, but it hit me hard, because Miles had finally let go of the shadow that used to live inside him. That train car, that scarf, that window, all of it. But something unexpected happened the following week. A woman showed up at the depot asking questions. She was mid-30s, worn around the edges but sharp behind the eyes. Said she was from a nonprofit that helped unhoused families across state lines. She had seen the post I made weeks ago, the photo of the dog sitting in the train car, and it stopped her cold. I know this pup, she said, holding up her phone. The screen showed a blurry photo, same train car, different angle, and in the foreground, a little girl, maybe 10 or 11, bundled in a coat 3 sizes too big, kneeling beside a smaller version of Miles. Same ears, same eyes. And that scarf. Her name was Maisie, the girl, not the woman. She and her mother had stayed in the rail car for a stretch last winter. The nonprofit had helped them relocate after a domestic situation forced them to flee. But in the chaos of one night, when they left hurriedly, they lost the pup. He bolted when a door slammed. We searched, but we had to go. It wasn't safe. The woman's voice cracked. She never stopped asking about him. I stood there, hand resting on Miles's back, heart thudding in my chest. He was sitting next to me, and ears up, head tilted. "Where are they now?" I asked. "Pittsburgh," she said. "They're doing okay. Maisie's in school again. Her mom has a job. It's slow going, but they're stable, just missing something." I looked down at Miles. He was staring at the woman, not growling, not pacing, just alert, like he understood, like some piece of him had just snapped awake again. I didn't say yes right away. I brought Miles home that night, sat on the floor across from him, and talked. Like a fool. Like he could answer. "They're looking for you," I whispered. "She's alive. She didn't forget you." His eyes locked onto mine. Calm. Steady. And in that moment, I knew. He hadn't just been waiting. He'd been believing. Now the question was I strong enough to let him go? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the living room while Miles lay curled in his usual spot beneath the window. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scarf, the tag, the train car, her, Maisie. And I kept hearing that woman's voice. She never stopped asking about him. I'd never had kids, got close once, a long time ago. She wanted a family. I wanted to keep driving trains. That was back when Erie still buzzed, before schedules got cut and lives got rerouted, before everything felt quieter than it should. Miles shifted in his sleep, let out a soft sigh. I reached down, stroked the spot behind his ears. He didn't wake, just leaned in a little like he knew what I was feeling. And maybe he did. That was the thing about him. He never needed words. He just listened with his whole body. By morning, the ground outside was dusted white. First real snow of the season. Light, but enough to remind you winter wasn't waiting. I packed a small overnight bag, folded up the scarf, and placed it gently inside. Then I grabbed his leash, the harness, and opened the door. He was at my side in an instant. The drive to Pittsburgh was just over 2 hours. Miles rode shotgun, head low between his paws, eyes scanning the trees as they whipped past. We didn't play music, didn't talk, just the hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of the scarf shifting in my bag. I had the address. The nonprofit woman had arranged everything, said Maisie didn't know yet, said it would be better that way, just in case it was too much, just in case it wasn't really him, but it was. We both knew that. I pulled up to a small duplex in a quiet neighborhood just past noon. There was a bike on the porch, purple, with one handlebar grip missing, a snowman half-built on the front lawn, a door painted bright yellow. I stepped out slowly, leashed Miles but didn't pull him. Let him move on his own. He sniffed the air once, then started walking, straight up the porch, right to the door. I knocked. Footsteps. A pause. Then it opened. She was smaller than I expected, fragile almost, freckles across her cheeks, hair tied in 2 messy braids. She looked at me first, confused, then she looked down, and everything in her face just broke. "Milo," she whispered. Miles didn't lunge, didn't bark. He just stepped forward, tail swaying gently, ears low. He sat at her feet and looked up at her like no time had passed, like he'd just seen her yesterday. She dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around his neck, and sobbed into his fur. I turned away. Her mom stepped out a minute later, hand over her mouth, eyes glassy. She didn't say anything, just nodded once like she couldn't believe it either. Miles didn't move. He stayed wrapped in her arms for a long time, quiet, still, whole. That was when I realized something. He hadn't been mine to lose. He just needed a place to wait until she found her way back. I sat on the porch steps, watching them through the soft veil of falling snow. Miles stayed beside her, head tucked beneath her chin, not making a sound. He wasn't wagging his tail like he did for me. He wasn't playful or silly. He was still. Peaceful. Like something deep inside him had finally settled. Maisie didn't let go. Her mom crouched next to her, one hand on her back, tears in her eyes. I tried not to watch, tried to give them space, but it was impossible not to feel every ounce of what was happening. It was like watching a soul click back into place. When Maisie finally looked up, her face was soaked, her lips trembling. I thought he was gone, she whispered. I thought I left him forever. Her mom gently wiped her cheek. You didn't leave him. He found you. Miles lifted his head, nudged her chin once with his nose, then leaned into her again. She looked over at me then, really looked. Did you find him? I nodded. Not exactly. He found me. Or maybe he found the place you left him. And he waited. I reached into my coat and pulled out the scarf. Her eyes widened. She reached for it like it was glass. You kept it, she said. He kept it, I corrected. Every day. Never took it off until he was ready. She held it to her chest, clutched it like it was stitched from her own memories. I told him I'd come back, she said through tears. I told him to wait by the window. And he had, not just for days, for months, through rain and snow, through silence, through heartbreak. Her mom stood then and stepped over to me. She didn't say much, just wrapped her arms around me tight, sudden, without asking. I stood there stiff for a second, then hugged her back. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to, but you did. I shook my head. I think I needed him just as much as he needed you. Miles had curled up again beside Maisie now, his head resting in her lap. The snow caught on his fur like glitter. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. As I stepped off the porch, Maisie called out. Wait, I turned. Can I write to you? My throat tightened. I nodded. Please do. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A keychain, shaped like a little train engine, worn, chipped paint. He used to chase this when we played by the tracks, she said. Maybe it'll remind you of him, just in case you miss him. I took it with both hands, heart pounding. I'll miss him every day, I said, but now I'll miss him with peace. And that was the truth, because not all endings are sad, some are just quiet, right? Full circle. I stayed on the road longer than I needed to that night. Drove past my exit, let the silence fill the cab. Miles wasn't with me, but it still felt like he was in the seat beside me, like his weight hadn't fully left. I kept catching myself reaching down instinctively, like I might feel his head press against my palm. But the seat was empty. Just that little train keychain swinging from my rearview mirror, tapping gently with each bump in the road. When I finally pulled into my driveway back in Erie, I left the truck running for a minute. The porch light flickered on automatically. The house looked the same, still and warm, but quieter somehow. Inside, everything was in its place. His bowls, the blanket by the fire, that framed scarf above the mantel. I stood there, coat still on, staring at it. It had always been his story. I'd just been lucky enough to hold a chapter of it. But part of me wanted so badly to keep that chapter going. Part of me still expected to hear him shift in his sleep or feel him brush against my legs when I walked past the couch. I knew letting him go was right. It was the most right thing I'd done in a long, long time. But right doesn't mean easy. I sat by the fireplace with a cup of black coffee gone cold, watched the snow start to fall again through the window, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs comfort, just slow, silent tears that come when your heart has stretched too wide too fast and needs a minute to catch up. I thought about all the things he never said but told me anyway, about patience and loyalty, and what it means to wait even when the world forgets you, and maybe most of all, what it means to be seen, to be chosen, not because someone needed you, but because they loved you. That's what Miles had taught me. And that's what Maisie would carry now, not just a dog, a piece of her childhood that refused to let go, a love that waited at the window and kept its promise. Some stories don't need words. They're written in moments, in quiet, in waiting. Miles' story wasn't about rescue, not really. It was about faith, about a bond so deep it survived silence, distance, time, and even heartbreak. He didn't give up when the world told him to move on. He stayed because she had asked him to. And that was enough. Maisie gave him that scarf, a promise tied with small hands and all the hope a child could carry. And he guarded it like it was the only thing that mattered, because to him, it was. That scarf was memory. It was love. It was home. And when he was ready, he let it go. Not because he forgot her, but because she found him again. There are thousands of dogs like Miles, waiting, watching, hoping for someone to come back, or someone new to show up. And sometimes that someone is you. This story is real. It could be happening in your town, your street, your backyard, right now. So if this story touched your heart, share it. because stories like this save lives. They remind people to look twice, to listen, to care. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope. Because somewhere out there, a dog is still waiting at the window. A white German Shepherd puppy was drowning in broad daylight. The river below Boulder City, Nevada flashed like a blade under the noon sun, all glare and heat and the smell of wet stone. I'm Michael Hart, 42, an electrician who stops here after jobs to breathe where the canyon opens its chest. Today the air felt too bright, too clean, like a spotlight on something wrong. The sound reached me first, not a bark, but a thin, tearing cry that made the water seem suddenly alive with fear. I followed the noise along the rim path, my boots scraping red dust. Dragonflies stitched the air. The cliffs dropped to a gravel bar where the Colorado pressed past cattails and a tangle of driftwood. Then I saw it. A shock of white fur thrashing beneath the surface, bubbles trembling to the light. The puppy's ears were pinned flat, eyes wide as coins, his small body cinched in a frayed fishing net, whose hem carried dull lead weights like a necklace made to sink things that should breathe. He kicked once, twice, but the net snagged around a smooth river stone the size of a melon. The current tugged and turned him so his paws scraped the bottom and raised a brown cloud that looked like smoke in the clear water. I slid down 15 feet of scree without thinking, palms burning. Every instinct I had told me to move, to cut, to tear, to get him to air. That bright white against the dark riverbed. There is your thumbnail, your symbol, the moment nobody can scroll past. Sun pooled hard on my shoulders as I scrambled onto the gravel. The world shrank to two colors, the blue-green sheet of water and the white streak trying to breathe beneath it. The net was old nylon, gray and hairy at the knots, the kind you find snagged on willow roots after a flood. Someone had tied a length of cord through its corner and looped it around the rock. I felt a sour copper taste in my mouth, a mix of adrenaline and anger, and the part of me that's always cautious went silent. I waded in up to my shins. The Colorado was colder than it looked, a knife working through my jeans, but the puppy's chest pulsed under the surface, and there wasn't room in me for anything but that. He wasn't just any dog. He was a German Shepherd puppy. Maybe 4 months old, paws too big for his body, the kind of clumsy grace that tells you tomorrow could have been his first perfect run. His muzzle tilted toward the light as if he could sip air the way fish sip shadows. I called out, reflex, not plan, and the canyon threw my voice back in broken pieces. No one answered. No splashes, no footsteps on gravel. Only the river gritting over stones and the faint metallic click of those lead beads along the net as the current teased them. The puppy twisted toward the sound of me as if sound itself were a rope he could hold. He didn't understand rescue or danger. He understood presence. I took 2 more steps and the bottom dropped. Water licked my belt, then my ribs. I braced on a submerged boulder, teeth clenching against the cold, and reached. The net brushed my fingers, slick, alive with current, and for an instant I touched the pup's shoulder. Heat underwater, a life arguing with the river. He blinked slow as if to say that seeing me was enough to keep the panic from breaking him. I backed out to the shallows, lungs burning, brain already mapping the angles. Cut the cord, ripped the mesh, dragged the rock. My hands shook as I yanked off my work shirt and wrapped it around my forearm to guard against the knots. Behind me, the canyon glowed like a furnace door left open, but all the light in Nevada couldn't warm what I felt watching his chest stutter and still. He tried to stand and the net jerked him sideways. Bubbles leapt, then vanished. The frayed nylon tightened around the stone, the lead beads clacked together, and the white head slipped under. The laughter hit me harder than the river's roar. On the far bank, 2 teenagers in baseball caps crouched low, their sneakers wet, their voices cracking with the thrill of something ugly. They were the ones who had done this, hands still on the cord, tugging like fishermen reeling in pride. The white German Shepherd puppy wasn't caught by accident. He was their entertainment, their dare, their proof of courage and cruelty. I froze, every muscle in me pulling tight. My first thought was disbelief. Kids, not men, not strangers hardened by hate, but boys barely out of school. One held the end of the net in both fists, leaning back as if testing the weight. The other clapped him on the shoulder and howled. The sound ricocheted off the canyon walls, turning the canyon into an arena. The puppy thrashed, tangled deeper with each kick. His paws beat the water, scattering arcs of light, but the stone dragged him down like an anchor made for innocence. I could see his eyes above the surface for half a heartbeat, wide and startled, as though asking why the world had turned this way. Then the current shoved him under, and the river swallowed his voice. I shouted across the water. My voice came out raw, the kind of sound you make when your chest is cracked open. The boys stiffened, startled, but then one laughed again, higher this time, like a shield. "He can swim!" He yelled, though his eyes gave him away, nervous, uncertain. The other yanked the cord harder, forcing the puppy deeper. Every instinct told me to sprint along the bank, to leap, to claw them down, to tear that cord out of their hands. But I was trapped by the shape of the canyon, the water cutting me off, the stone walls rising steep. I could only stand there, half in the river, heart in my throat, as the lead weights dragged that white body in circles beneath the surface. The puppy kicked once more. His paw scraped the gravel bed and stirred up a cloud of silt, a smoke bomb in the water that blurred him into ghost shape. Then nothing, just the net's gray line trembling like a nerve under tension. The boys whispered now, their laughter drying in the canyon air. One shifted his feet, uneasy, while the other tried to look bold. But even their bravado couldn't hide the truth. They hadn't expected silence. They hadn't expected the German Shepherd puppy to vanish so completely, leaving only a churning patch of water where light no longer touched. I gripped the rock at my side, knuckles burning. My boots slipped on algae, the river biting higher at my legs, but I didn't feel cold anymore. All I felt was the weight of decision pressing heavier than the stone at the end of that net. The canyon around us hushed, as if the world itself leaned closer, waiting to see what I would do. The surface broke once, weakly, a bubble trail clawing upward and then closed again. I didn't think. My body moved before my mind caught up. I lunged into the river, the shock of the cold slicing through my chest like glass. The current seized me instantly, dragging at my jeans, hammering my ribs against hidden rocks. But I pushed forward, arms knifing the water, eyes locked on that faint ripple where the net had sunk. The boys shouted, panicked now, their bravado collapsing under the weight of what was happening. One dropped the cord, the line snapping slack in the current. The other bolted up the bank, his sneakers slipping on loose gravel. Their voices trailed behind them as they ran, but I didn't care. They were ghosts already. I dove, lungs burning, and the river swallowed me whole. Silt blinded me, stinging my eyes, but my hands kept sweeping, reaching, clawing for something solid in the liquid dark. Then I felt it. A trembling body wrapped in nylon mesh, the desperate beat of a tiny heart thrumming against my palm. He was limp, but not gone. His fur tangled with the cord, paws twisted awkwardly inside the net. I yanked hard, the nylon biting deep into my fingers, shredding skin, but the knots held like iron. My chest screamed for air. The surface was somewhere above me, unreachable, as if the river had grown endless. I thought of my father in those seconds, the way he once pulled me out of a lake when I was 7, when my legs cramped and I slipped under. His voice echoed in my skull. "Don't you quit, son. Not while there's breath left in you." With a surge, I kicked upward, dragging the puppy against my chest. We broke the surface in an explosion of air and spray. I gasped, heaved, my lungs on fire, but I held him above the water, forcing his muzzle into the sunlight, begging the river to let him breathe. We spun in the current, battered against stones, but I angled for the bank. My boots scraped rock, knees slamming mud, and somehow we made it out. Both of us coughing, choking, collapsed on the gravel shore. The puppy didn't move. His eyes were closed, his chest still. I pressed him against my jacket, shaking, whispering words I didn't know I had. "Come on, buddy, don't give up now. You've got too much left." I tilted his head back, rubbed his ribs, pushed the water out. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, but I refused to let go. The world had gone silent around us. Nothing but the river's roar and the frantic beat of my own heart. Then, just when the weight of failure began to crush me, his body jerked. A cough, wet and fragile, tore from his throat. Water spilled from his nose. His chest hitched again, then again. His eyes fluttered open, dark, frightened, but alive. The German Shepherd puppy had chosen to fight, and now, so would I. His first breath was only a whisper, but it thundered through me like salvation. The white German Shepherd puppy shuddered, his sides convulsing as the river's grip loosened, one heartbeat at a time. I cradled him tighter against my chest, feeling his ribs move beneath my palm. He was still wrapped in that cursed net, the gray strands cinched around his belly and legs, pinning him as if the river still had claws in him. I tore at the knots with my bare hands. The nylon was coarse, biting into my fingers, refusing to yield. Every pull carved fire into my skin, reopening cuts from the struggle underwater. Blood mixed with river water, streaking red across his pale fur, but I didn't stop. Pain meant nothing. Only the sound of his shallow breaths mattered. I braced him on my knee, pinning the net against a rock, and pulled until the cords groaned. They were meant to hold fish, to drown life. They weren't meant for him. His paw twitched weakly, a silent plea that cut deeper than any blade. "You're not going back under," I muttered, teeth clenched. "Not while I'm here." The lead weights clinked against stone as the net resisted me. For a second, the thought of failure slashed across my mind, that I would free only part of him, that the rest of the net would cling and choke until it dragged him back into darkness. My chest tightened with the same panic that had filled his eyes beneath the surface. I dug my nails into the cord, twisting, wrenching, every tendon in my arms screaming. The mesh finally gave, a single strand snapping with a sharp pop, then another. Each break was a gasp of hope. I ripped and ripped until the net split open like rotten cloth falling away in sodden clumps. The puppy slumped in my arms, freed but exhausted. His fur clung to his thin frame, his ears flattened, his tail lifeless. Yet when I brushed my thumb across his muzzle, he blinked, slow and uncertain. Alive. Still here. Above us, the canyon was mercilessly bright. Sunlight hit the water until it glittered like broken glass, but the heat did nothing to chase the chill from my bones. My whole body shook, not from the cold, but from the vision that kept replaying, the sight of him sinking, the silence when his paws stopped moving. I pressed my forehead to his, whispering through clenched teeth. "They thought you didn't matter. They thought you were just a game. But you're going to prove them wrong. We both are." Behind me, gravel shifted, the scrape of sneakers. I turned, clutching the puppy tight against me. The boys hadn't gone far after all. They stood halfway up the bank, pale now, their caps askew, watching with wide eyes. They weren't laughing anymore. I rose to my feet, the German Shepherd puppy pressed tight against my chest, water dripping from both of us onto the gravel like we were two survivors pulled from the same wreck. The boys froze where they stood. Their earlier bravado had vanished, replaced with the kind of silence that lives after a scream. One clutched his cap in both hands, twisting the brim until it bent. The other shoved his fists deep into his hoodie pocket, eyes darting everywhere but at me. "You think this is funny?" My voice came out low, raw, edged with the rage I'd swallowed underwater. "You think drowning a puppy proves you're strong?" The puppy stirred faintly, his chest rising against my palm, reminding me I didn't have time for speeches. Still, the words clawed their way out. "Strength isn't in cruelty. Strength is in mercy." The taller boy muttered something, a half-formed excuse that dissolved in the canyon wind. They looked like children again, faces stripped of the masks they wore a few minutes ago. But I had no room left for pity. My arms ached from holding him, and every ounce of me screamed to get him warm, to get him safe. I stepped past them, boots grinding on the stones, daring them to block my way. Neither did. They shrank back, eyes fixed on the trembling white fur in my arms, the German Shepherd puppy who had already fought harder for life than they ever had for anything. As I climbed toward the rim, I felt the canyon closing behind me like a door sealing shut. Their laughter, their cruelty, stayed down there with the broken net. What came with me was breath, thin, shallow, but steady. At the top, I laid him gently on the sun-baked rock. His body was limp, fur plastered to his ribs, but when I set him down, his paw twitched again, as if his spirit refused to rest. My chest tightened with a rush of fear and hope tangled into one. I bent over him, blocking the sun with my shadow, and pressed 2 fingers lightly to his side. The beat was faint, barely there, but it was there. He hadn't let go. Neither would I. But as I stared at his still closed eyes and felt the shallow flutter of his lungs, the truth slammed into me. Breathing wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed me to act now. I tilted his head back, wiped water from his nose, and drew a breath so deep it hurt. Because the fight for his life wasn't finished yet. I pressed my lips gently over the puppy's small muzzle, sealing around his nose, and pushed air into his fragile chest. Then I pulled back and used 2 fingers to compress his ribs, counting out a rhythm I hadn't practiced in years, but had never forgotten. The canyon around me was silent, except for the sound of my breath and the desperate beat of my heart. His body stayed limp under my hands, fur cold and heavy with river water, each second stretched into forever. I thought of my daughter's face when she was small and how I'd once pulled her out of a backyard pool, gasping, terrified, begging for her to cough. That day she had. I prayed this little one would too. "Come on," I whispered, my voice breaking as I gave another breath. "Don't leave me now. You fought that river. You can fight this too." I kept going. Breath, press, breath, press. My fingertips ached from pressing against his tiny chest, but I didn't stop. The world had narrowed to this one fragile body, this single battle between life and silence. Then, suddenly, the tiniest jerk. His throat convulsed. A weak gurgle rattled up, followed by a thin stream of water spilling from his mouth. I flipped him gently onto his side, urging his lungs to clear. His ribs expanded, once, twice, shallow but real. A sound tore from me, half sob, half laugh. My hands shook as I rubbed his sides, coaxing warmth back into him. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and uncertain, but they found me. For a second, he simply stared. Then the faintest whimper slipped out, fragile as glass, yet louder than any roar. Tears blurred my vision. I pulled him close against my chest, against the heat of my soaked shirt, and felt his weak heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. He was here. He was fighting back, but his body still trembled. Water still clung to his lungs. Survival had only just begun, and the canyon air was growing colder with each passing minute. I wrapped my arms tighter around him, my mind racing. He needed shelter. He needed fire. He needed more than I could give him out here. And if I didn't move fast, the victory I'd just tasted could still slip away. His body was so light in my arms, but every tremor that ran through him felt like a thunderclap against my chest. The German Shepherd puppy clung to life, and I wasn't going to let that fragile thread snap. I shifted him closer, my breath warming his soaked fur, and started moving, boots slipping against the rocks that lined the riverbank. The canyon walls glowed in the late Nevada sun, the red stone reflecting fire into the water below was fried, but all I could see was his shallow breathing, the rise and fall so faint I kept pressing my hand to his ribs to be sure. My truck was a quarter-mile away, parked where the dirt trail cut off, but it felt like 100. Every step was a fight. My clothes were heavy with river water, clinging, dragging me down. My fingers stung from the cuts the net had left, blood mixing with mud and grit. But none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the faint pulse I felt through that tiny chest. I thought of when I was 12, when my father let me hold his old shepherd Duke after a storm had knocked down the barn. Duke had been soaked, shivering, and I'd wrapped him in a blanket. That night, I swore to myself I would always protect animals the way Duke had once protected me. Now, decades later, that vow had come back with a weight I'd never imagined. The trail narrowed, sharp rocks slicing into my boots, but I kept climbing. The puppy whimpered once, barely audible, but it was enough to send a surge of determination through me. "That's it, Arrow," I said without thinking, the name spilling out like it had been waiting all along. "Stay with me." His eyelids fluttered, his tiny paw twitching against my arm. My throat tightened. He was fighting, but his body was still cold, his breath shallow. He needed warmth, he needed safety, and I had to give it to him fast. The top of the path came into sight, my truck, battered and dust-covered, waiting like salvation. But as I stumbled the last few steps, I caught sight of movement at the ridge. The 2 boys were still there, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. They weren't laughing now. They were watching me. And in their eyes, I saw something darker than mischief. Something that made my grip tighten around Arrow as I prepared for what came next. They didn't move as I reached the truck, their shadows etched against the canyon rim like vultures waiting for a collapse. My chest was still burning from the river, but my voice came out steady as I pulled the German Shepherd puppy tighter against me. His small heart was beating unevenly, like a broken drum, and I knew every second mattered. I yanked open the truck door with my free hand, tossing my soaked jacket aside. The seat was hot from the Nevada sun, leather warm against Arrow's trembling body. I laid him down carefully, rubbing his chest to keep him awake, to keep him here. His fur smelled of river water and fear, but underneath it all there was life. Faint, fragile, but present. Behind me, gravel shifted. I didn't have to turn to know the boys had followed. My jaw clenched. Their sneakers scraped closer, hesitant this time, not bold like before. I kept my back to them, focusing on Arrow, who gave a soft whine that nearly broke me in half. "Breathe, buddy," I whispered, leaning close, my forehead almost touching his. "Just keep breathing." I remembered CPR classes, the rhythm, the pressure points. My hands worked without thought, press, release, breathe, until a shudder ran through him. His eyes flickered open, cloudy but alive. His paw brushed weakly against my wrist, and that single touch gave me more fire than 100 words. The boys stood only a few feet away now, their voices low. One of them muttered something about just a dog. My head snapped up, and for the first time I faced them fully. My voice came out low, but it carried all the weight of a man who had nothing left to lose. "You almost killed him," I said, every syllable hard as stone. "You think this makes you strong? You don't even know what strength is." They shifted, eyes darting between me and the puppy. No smirks now, no laughter, just silence thick enough to choke on. I turned back to Arrow, wrapping him in a dry blanket I kept behind the seat. His breathing steadied, just barely, but his body was still ice against my arms. He needed warmth, food, a safe place far from this canyon. I had to move, and fast. I started the engine, the roar echoing against the cliffs. The boys flinched, stepping back. Arrow stirred at the vibration, his ear twitching. I tightened the blanket around him, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the realization of how close I had come to losing him. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the rocks. As I pressed the gas, pulling onto the dirt road, I glanced once in the mirror. The boys were shrinking in the distance, but their faces weren't full of defiance anymore. They were pale, haunted, like they'd seen something they weren't ready to face. And I knew this wasn't the end. Because saving Arrow from the water was just the beginning of the fight to bring him back to life. On the ride back, every bump of the dirt road rattled through my bones, but my eyes never left the German Shepherd puppy curled in the blanket beside me. His breaths were shallow, irregular, and each one felt like a countdown. The heater blasted, filling the cab with warm air, but his tiny body still shivered as though the river had left ice inside him. I pulled into my driveway in Henderson, tires crunching against gravel, and slammed the truck into park. My house wasn't much, single story, plain walls, an old swing creaking in the front yard, but tonight it was going to be a sanctuary. I scooped Arrow up, blanket and all, and rushed inside. His head lolled against my chest, frighteningly limp. I laid him gently on the rug near the fireplace and flicked the switch. Flames roared to life, casting a golden glow over the room. My hands worked frantically. Towel, another blanket, anything to chase away the cold clinging to him. His fur clung wet and heavy, and his eyes slid shut again. Panic shot through me like lightning. "Stay with me, Arrow," I muttered, kneeling over him. My fingers found his tiny ribcage, rising and falling too slowly. Instinct kicked in, just like at the riverbank. I tilted his head, pressed 2 fingers to his chest, and breathed air into his lungs. My own pulse thundered in my ears. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the fire's crackle and the pounding of my heart. Then, suddenly, he jerked. A wet cough, weak but real, burst from his chest. Water dribbled from his mouth as he gasped, his body shuddering like a machine sputtering back to life. Relief ripped through me so hard it left me dizzy. I laughed, but it came out broken, halfway between joy and tears. "That's it, boy. That's it. You're tougher than they ever knew." His eyes fluttered open, dull, glassy, but searching. His paw twitched against the blanket, as if trying to anchor himself to the world again. I held him close, my forehead against his damp fur, and whispered, "You're not alone anymore. Not ever again." The firelight danced across his face, illuminating the sharp lines of his ears, the streak of pale fur along his muzzle. In that glow, he didn't look like a half-drowned puppy anymore. He looked like a survivor. But I knew this was just the first step. His body was still weak, his breaths fragile. He needed food, medicine, and time, things I wasn't sure I had the skill to give. Yet as he stirred faintly in my arms, pressing closer to my warmth, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just trying to save his life anymore. I was bound to him now, in a way that went deeper than fear or duty. And deep down, I sensed that the hardest part of Arrow's journey was still ahead of us. The night stretched on, a blur of firelight and whispered prayers. I barely noticed the hours slipping past as I sat with Arrow pressed against my chest, his fragile heartbeat echoing against my ribs. Every so often he stirred, a faint twitch of his paw or a soft whimper that reminded me he was still fighting. By dawn, pale light spilled through the curtains, and for the first time I allowed myself to believe he might actually make it. I warmed milk on the stove, mixing it with a little honey the way my grandmother once showed me when I nursed a sick farm dog as a boy. The scent filled the kitchen with a strange comfort, a memory folding over the fear of last night. I dipped a finger into the warm liquid and touched it to Arrow's lips. At first, nothing, just the shallow pull of his breath. Then his tongue flicked out, tentative but hungry. My chest tightened with relief. I guided more to him slowly, drop by drop, until his tiny body seemed to wake with each swallow. Afterward, I carried him into the living room, settling us by the window where the Nevada sun poured across the rug. The warmth painted his damp fur in shades of gold, and for the first time I saw a spark in his eyes. Not fear, not exhaustion, but life. His tail gave the faintest thump against the blanket. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I couldn't help but smile. "You're a fighter, Arrow, stronger than you know." As if to prove me right, he pushed his nose against my palm, a gesture so small yet so powerful it broke something open inside me. The walls I'd built over years of solitude, the numbness I thought was protection, it all cracked under the weight of this tiny survivor leaning on me for everything. Later, when he tried to stand, his legs trembled like brittle sticks, and he collapsed back into the blanket. I scooped him up instantly, but he let out a sharp bark, stubborn and defiant. I laughed aloud, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. That bark wasn't weakness, it was determination. By midday, he was sleeping again, this time curled against my leg with his breaths steadier, deeper. I watched him and realized I was no longer afraid of losing him. The danger had passed, the tide had turned. What lay ahead wasn't about survival anymore, it was about rebuilding. And as I looked down at Arrow, wrapped in sunlight and stubborn willpower, I knew our story was no longer just about saving his life. It was about discovering why he had been given back to me, and what that second chance meant for both of us. I carried Arrow outside later that afternoon, wrapped snug in a faded quilt, his nose twitching at every scent the desert breeze carried. The canyon stretched vast and endless, red cliffs glowing in the sun. It should have been peaceful, but a sharp crack of laughter broke the stillness. Two figures stood near the overlook, the same boys from the river. Their baseball caps shaded their eyes, but I knew those faces, those careless grins. My chest tightened. Arrow whimpered softly, pressing closer against me as if he recognized them too. The boys shifted uneasily when they noticed us, their laughter faltering. For a moment, no one moved. Only the wind moved dust across the rocks. I stepped forward, holding Arrow close, my voice steady but edged with a fire I hadn't felt in years. "You think strength is drowning something smaller than you? That it makes you men to bury life under stone?" The words cut the air, sharp as broken glass. They didn't answer, just shifted their weight, eyes darting between me and the tiny German shepherd puppy, whose chest now rose with fragile, undeniable life. I took another step, closer now, my shadow falling across them. "Real strength is here," I said, pressing my palm against Arrow's trembling side. "It's fighting when the world tries to break you. It's standing guard when no one else will, and it's carrying those who can't walk on their own." The taller one muttered something under his breath, but his eyes dropped, shame flickering there for the first time. The younger one shifted uncomfortably, staring at the ground as though the canyon itself was accusing him. Arrow let out the faintest growl, a fragile, broken sound, but filled with spirit. I almost smiled. That tiny growl carried more courage than anything I'd ever seen from those boys. The silence grew heavy, stretching between us. Finally, the taller one tugged at his friend's sleeve, and they turned away, their footsteps echoing across the rocks until they disappeared into the canyon's edge. I let out a slow breath, my grip on Arrow tightening, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. He nestled into my chest, his eyes closing with trust so pure it made my throat burn. We had faced down the darkness together, not just the river, but the cruelty behind it. And as I turned back toward home, the sun warming us both, I knew Arrow's fight wasn't only about survival anymore. It was about showing the world what compassion really looked like and daring others to follow. That night, as the desert cooled and the stars spilled across the Nevada sky, I sat by the fireplace with Arrow curled against my chest. His breathing had steadied, his small frame rising and falling in a rhythm that soothed the storm still raging in me. The faint glow of the flames lit up his damp fur, turning it to gold, and for the first time all day, I felt peace. I thought about how close he had been to disappearing beneath that river, to becoming just another lost story no one would ever tell. Instead, he was here, warm, alive, fighting to heal. I whispered the name again, firmer this time, Arrow. His ears twitched, his head lifting slightly, as if he knew it belonged to him. That one word felt like a promise between us, carved deep into my soul. Looking into his eyes, I realized what he had given me wasn't just gratitude or trust. He had reminded me of the strength inside compassion, of how one choice to act when it's easier to turn away can change everything. I had spent years walking past pain, convincing myself I couldn't save the world. But saving Arrow showed me something different. Sometimes saving one life is enough to remind you of the value of all life. I reached over and pulled the quilt tighter around him, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. My voice broke as I said it out loud, not to him but to myself. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility, it's pet care, it's hope. The weight of the day settled, but so did a new resolve. Arrow had survived because someone refused to give up. How many others were still waiting for that chance? I knew then this story wasn't only ours, it was one I had to share. If you felt Arrow's fight, if you've seen his spirit in these words, then carry it forward, share it, because every story like his can open another heart, can save another dog waiting in the shadows. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice, be their hope.